On today's episode of the podcast, I had a chance to sit down again with Aaron Fulkerson. Aaron is the CEO of an exciting new tech startup called Opaque Systems, which is a confidential computing platform for collaborative analytics and AI at scale. Essentially, they help application developers develop secure application on private data. Today, we talked about three really exciting topics, amongst others. One, we talked about how his journey from being an entrepreneur to working for a big tech company in ServiceNow and then back to being an entrepreneur and some of the unique challenges and opportunities that presented. Two, we talked about the erosion of trust in the technology space amongst end users and how he's working to actually reestablish that trust among consumers. And then also we talked about how he's using business to make a positive impact on the people around him. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Aaron, welcome back.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Darren. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
Yeah, so you've been a busy guy in the last couple of years. I see you got married. Looks like you were a world traveler, connecting back to your time in the past of living out in the woods and traveling in the woods, and now starting a new business. Like, what's been happening with you in your world beyond that?
Well, a lot since over the last, 5 months. Second half of last year, I resigned from ServiceNow. I joined a new business, Opaque Systems. I got married. We took a extended honeymoon to Africa and Europe, and then ended the year strong in the new company. So it's been an eventful 5 or 6 months.
Yeah, what was that like taking some time off? I know I always fantasize about taking some time, whether it's a 3-month or 12-month sabbatical or living in Europe, like I had the opportunity to do with my parents when I was a kid. But what was that like just to get off the grid a little bit and just reflect and just enjoy being newly married?
Well, it was great having a lot of time to connect with my wife, Stacy, and I always really appreciate and enjoy that. You know, I enjoy doing little things like going shopping with her, like the grocery store. I just really enjoy being with her, and she's always very present. And as a yogi, you'd expect that she would be. I'll tell you though, from my perspective, like we were in Tanzania and we did this epic, amazing hot air balloon ride over the Serengeti. And I started talking to the balloonist, the balloon captain, who's from Canada. And I was super curious about, like, I understand the physics of hot air balloons. So I ordinarily, if I didn't know that, I would definitely be curious about that. But I got really, really curious about the business itself, and learned that the business is doing north of 12 million annually. It's owner operated, has been for 50 years. The owners are in their 80s. Their margins are somewhere between 30 and 40%. And, you know, I immediately start going into, oh my gosh, you could like totally do a leverage buyout of this business. Oh my gosh, we could like do an adventure roll up of other businesses that are owner operated with owners that are looking to retire, who have established relationships, good operating margins, doing north of 10 million. And the point is that when I take time off, I love to learn. I love to connect with people I care about, but I do love business. And immediately, like, I'm already like, you know, I'm sitting there finishing up, floating over the Serengeti, hashing out in my mind, like a back of the envelope leverage buyout and business plan for how you would actually build an adventure club by doing a roll up, like a private equity style roll up in destinations.
It's always on for us, I guess. That's interesting. Is you always struck me as someone who's really curious. And I guess what I'm curious about is, we talked about the last time you were on the show, we talked about being an entrepreneur, then going to work for a huge company in ServiceNow. And now you're going back to the old days, back to the future, if you will, in terms of being an entrepreneur, working for a startup again. Like, what's that transition back to being an entrepreneur been like for you?
Here's what I've observed. Like, the most immediate thing that I've observed is when you're working for a larger organization, ServiceNow is, I mean, it's not that big of a company. it's 22,000 people when I left. So by most people's standards, that's a big company, but it's not like an Accenture, which employs 900,000 people, right? Your roots. But the thing that I've observed about working in a growth stage company that is earlier versus a mature enterprise is when you're in an earlier stage company, the ratio of like productive work to communicating about the productive work you did is very different. So I'll give you an example. At Opaque, every hour of my day is devoted to building value for the customer. Like every minute of my day. At a ServiceNow, and I think anybody who's worked in larger companies will appreciate this. For every hour that I spent creating value for humankind, I spent 10 hours communicating to my peers about the value I created for humankind. So that's probably the most material difference between in an earlier stage company versus a big company.
That's obviously a massive transition in rebuilding those muscles. Like, what was that like for you? Did you have to shake off some of that rust a little bit, or was it a pretty easy snap back to the old ways?
Oh no, it was really easy. I really appreciate building value for humankind, like creating things for making the world better. And I appreciate and respect the need inside of a larger organization for most of your time being allocated in communicating to others who are your peers the work you did, but it's not what I enjoy doing. I'd much rather create net positive value for humankind.
Yeah. So tell me about just that. You said a natural curiosity around doing a roll up with a hot air balloon company, and like how did this new opportunity come about? Obviously, it's in a maybe similar but related space to what you'd been doing before. But like, how did that whole opportunity materialize?
So Opaque was invented, the technology, at a really famous computer science lab called Rise Lab, which is at UC Berkeley. Rise Lab is where Apache Spark was created, which is used by every company to do analytics, like data analytics and ML. And they also invented Ray, which is a distributed compute platform for Python. So really technical, nerdy shit that every business on the planet uses to do data and AI. More recently, they created an open source project called MC Squared, which is what Opaque became. So each one of these foundational technologies that the Rise Lab invented, and it's this core group of researchers at the Rise Lab and their students who invented all of these. They'll start off with, Spark became an open source project. Most people who are not in technology would recognize Databricks, which was the company that Spark turned into. Databricks today is doing, I don't know what it ended the year at, but my guess is somewhere between $1.5 and $2 billion a year in revenue, and it's growing at 59% annually. The same founders did Ray, which became Anyscale, and the same founders did MC Squared, which became Opaque. So they had a core foundational technology. Opaque's particular innovation is allowing organizations and businesses to process encrypted data, just real groundbreaking, revolutionary technology. They were looking for a professional CEO who had a technology background and also a background in open source. They did a retained executive search. My name came up during the executive search within their board and also in the industry. And I started talking to them kind of midway through last year. So for me, when I met the company, I already was running a business unit at ServiceNow, and I really loved the team I worked with and the people I worked with. But what struck me was this company, Opaque, was at the nexus of three massive megatrends. One, there has been a backlash against technology companies related to the overzealous mining and operationalization of personal data. People are very upset about privacy. There is a erosion of trust that has been largely created by high-tech companies that is now affecting every aspect of our society, this erosion of trust. So Opaque, providing tools for privacy, adding a privacy layer to data and AI, struck me as, oh my gosh, this is helping to restore trust at a time when another major, like massive macro trend is taking place, which is generative AI. So the convergence of these trends and the reality that there's been erosion of trust in society, and my perception that Opaque's technology can help really rebuild trust by giving people better tools to maintain privacy while also benefiting from analytics and AI, it was just a no-brainer that this was an important company that I wanted to be a part of.
Yeah, I'd love to get back to that in a minute. The erosion of trust, I think that's super interesting. But just for the non AI experts, for the non people who don't understand open source, I know you talked about this the last time, but do you mind just giving us a little more of a layman's definition of like the work that you guys are doing? What like obviously talked about the problems you solve, but actually like maybe some real world examples of that.
Sure. I think the best way for me to do it is to give you an analogy. Let's say that data and AI that's being used globally. I hope I can land this, by the way. I may totally whiff this one because I'm shooting from the hip here on this metaphor. So I'll see if I can pull it off. Let's say that there's this kitchen that is operated by chefs, and the ingredients that go into the cuisine that they make are ingredients that are provided by the world's population. But the ingredients is like super personal data about these people. So they're taking the ingredients, mixing them up, and making meals that they're serving and charging for using the personal data of the population of Earth. So this is the analogy of everybody is building applications on data and AI. Those applications are the meal. The ingredients are people's private data. That gives people no control over their personal data. It's a privacy issue. It's a real concern. So what Opaque does is it creates a kitchen where people can build applications without actually seeing the individual ingredients that are provided by the population of Earth. Those individual personal insights are encrypted. Nobody can see them. But you can still deliver great quality meals out there, but the chefs can't see the individual ingredients. I don't know if that landed. Did it land?
You nailed it, but the meals sound like they could be a little unappetizing, bunch of zeros and ones. but
I hope it worked. And then I'll put it like in a non-metaphor, which is Opaque has a platform that we call confidential data and AI. And the bottom line is where all of the other platforms, like we'll extend existing data and AI tools, and we focus on the private data. So we talk about it being confidential data, and we keep it encrypted end to end, including while it's being processed. So nobody can see the underlying data, but you can still build analytics outcomes and business outcomes based on analytics and AI.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I appreciate the detail there. But getting back to just this idea of erosion of trust. So it sounds like what you're enabling is some of these application developers to almost build that trust back with their consumers, or I guess the providers of the world's data. Is that about right?
That's absolutely correct. So the challenge today is they're building data and AI apps, but they don't have any technology that allows them to secure the private data. They're going to do it. So what Opaque gives them is the ability to secure the data and still build the app.
It's almost like 3M, right? We don't make the applications you use, but we make the applications you use private or whatever, something like that.
Yeah, was that 3M or was that BASF? we don't make the products, we make the products better. Was that BASF? In fact, I had somebody else use that same analogy about they knew what opaque was, and they're like, oh, I get it. You're adding the privacy layer, and you're like BASF, but it's privacy. You're making everybody else's product better through the privacy layer. And I was like, yeah, I haven't heard that in a while.
So you landed yours. I totally whiffed on mine. So I guess we'll move on to the next topic. But I would love I'm curious just as an entrepreneur, and I feel like there's this conception you have to choose, work or your personal life, and obviously more trends around blending those things and so forth. But I think the reality is there's this hustle mindset and culture. And talk to me about just that, you being an entrepreneur and also being recently married, just in what's that like? It feels like people have to make a choice between married to their personal life or married to their work. I'm just curious what that's been like for you over the evolution of your career.
I do have 2 teenage children now as well, which is relevant to point out because it's not like without kids, it's certainly easier if you just have, a spouse. But when you add kids to the mix, that makes it even all the more challenging. So my experience is that having a good partner makes all the difference in the world. Having a partner who understands your passion, right? Like I'm really passionate about what I do, but I still always make time for my partner and my children. However, I do kind of work some odd hours here and there, and that's how I manage to juggle things. I'm pretty flex on my hours when I do my work. But I think that you're right. Folks do have a really bad habit of thinking that they're supposed to work around the clock. And I don't remember if we talked about this in the last pod, but the reality is, how many hours in a week are actual productive work hours? And there's been a lot of research on this. And the reality is not that much. The actual productive work hours, I mean, I'm totally making this up. I have no idea what it is. What is it, 20 hours? So people who are working 80, 100 hours a week because they're wrapped up in I'm an entrepreneur, the billionaire mindset, or whatever the latest Instagram influencers feeding them about, sleeping 4 hours a day, but sleeping, having 3 sleep cycles in 2 days. So then they have 10 days a week or whatever. I don't know. I saw that recently. It was pretty funny. The bottom line is you can't do productive work if you don't have balance in your life. And balance in your life means that you're maintaining your personal relationships, your professional work, and also really, like, number one, most importantly, your own health and fitness. And that's both psychological and physical. I feel like I rambled a little bit there, and I almost want to go deeper on some of those, to be honest, but I'm going to pause.
Yeah, I'd be curious just in terms of what do you do to maintain that balance? And I think you pointed to something else, which is so important to have someone in your corner, whoever that is, whether it's your spouse or, a personal board of advisors or whatnot, even like a life board of advisors to hold you, accountable to commitments, not just to work. But tell me about some of those things you do to maintain that balance, to make sure you're healthy, you're fit, you're active, so that you can actually show up and be as productive as you need to be.
Yeah, I will. Let me put a plug for a book that I read recently that I really love. Positive Intelligence. I forget the guy who wrote it. Just look it up. Positive Intelligence. It is a wonderful book. It's basically a Harvard business nerd, and I think he did like a math, and then he did Harvard business. He's in software. He basically put like a rational approach to Buddhism, which I'm Buddhist. My friends were when I was a kid, so I became Buddhist like when I was a teenager, and I've really appreciated the philosophy of Buddhism. And then he actually put like a framework around it, which was very appealing to my rational mind and my math nerd background. So Positive Intelligence, strongly recommend. He speaks a great deal about the importance of having a positive mindset and doing like repetitions of positivity. And he lays a whole framework out. Go read the book. So one, from a personal perspective, having a positive mindset is super important. Two, it wasn't until I was in my 30s, and I know this sounds ridiculous, that I realized that my brain is part of my body. So you have to exercise and keep your body fit if you expect your brain to be functioning optimally. So I run 4 days a week, and then I lift or go to a boot camp like 3 days a week. So every week I'm doing a lot of physical exercise, which really helps center me emotionally, spiritually, cognitively. I can't overstate the importance of that.
Yes, I've been a cardio maniac for a long time. I would do an hour of elliptical every day. I didn't have time when I did 30 today, so I'm feeling a little detriment there. But my oldest son has got me into the gym again. I hadn't lifted weights in a long time, and it's just that exertion piece too has been I found to be so helpful to kind of like free a lot of the stress, a lot of the thoughts, and like allow me to get into that positive state too beyond just mere exercise. I just found that like pushing myself a little bit and ramping up the training has been personally helpful, at least.
And to your other point about having someone in your corner, um, I have like what is the most valuable thing to me has always been my interpersonal connections. I'll plug another book, From Strength to Strength by Brooks. He's the guy who writes for The Atlantic. He also writes about happiness. He's written several books about happiness. I can't remember if it's Arthur Brooks. I can't remember. I get the Brooks mixed up. He writes about going into like the final act of your life, and his study and research on what are the most important things that increase lifespan and health span. It's your social your interpersonal relationships, and those are like so critically important. So I have really made a great effort over the last, probably like 6 years. I didn't think about this until I got into my 40s, how important that is, because I'd get so fixated on work. I make an effort to just send a note to friends and keep in touch, even if it's a text message. How you doing? Happy New Year. Happy holidays. What are you up to? How's so-and-so? And that interpersonal relationships are just so important. And we know now through research, like Blue Zone talks about this too, like people who live over 100, you'll see that reflected in Blue Zone as well. Well, you brought up like what did you call it? Like a life board. If some people need a framework like that, and I've seen really useful frameworks. ServiceNow had one they shared with me too, where you'd have like a personal board of advisors, and then they had like different seats, and you'd kind of like fill in the names of the people in the different seats. If like I do it more organically, but I think that's a really useful way to get people started.
Yeah, something I've done, and I can't say I'm perfect on this, but with my goals every year, I'd have it by category: health and fitness, business growth goals and so forth. And I would share those goals, specific ones, with like the seats you're describing, someone who I really know who's into, health and fitness and being, mentally fit as well. I'll share those goals. Entrepreneurs, I'll share those business growth goals and so forth. And having that, yeah, it's not just people talk about business personal advisors, but I like the life advisors because there's so many things like you talk about to be business fit. You got to be physically fit. You got to be emotionally fit. You got to be, fit from a wellness perspective too. So yeah, I love that idea of having that life board of advisors.
Yeah, me too.
So take me back a little bit. I'm curious about the shift that you made, and I'm not sure how much you were in the world of AI in your previous role at ServiceNow, but like, what was that transition like? I mean, I was thinking about being an entrepreneur. One of the downsides versus a big company is you don't have this training organization that's constantly growing and developing you. But like, what was that like for you to make that transition into AI? How'd you go about to learning about the new topics so that you could actually be a CEO of a successful company?
Yeah, great question. Here's the reality of generative AI. One, it is the most important and profoundly, what is the word I'm looking for? Society altering technology ever experienced by humankind. When it first hit, like early, like, it was more than a year ago, right? When LLMs became, a thing in the world, but I didn't really tune into it until probably January of 23. So I was a few months late. When I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, this is as big as the internet. By the end of the week, I realized I was wrong. It is by far more dramatic than the internet. So this changes everything. I adopted LLMs like right out of the gates as soon as I could. And I've been a prolific user of ChatGPT and others, but mostly I use ChatGPT. And I can tell you, like, it has absolutely boosted my productivity by at least 40%. And you see multiple studies now coming out about similar productivity gains. So if you think about that, and you think about the fact that all of a sudden the workforce is going to get a 40% productivity increase, that has dramatic effects on people's jobs. We are seeing what we're going to see is a massive layoff of developers. It's going to affect all industries, but it's really going to affect software programmers. So one key point is every single week, something's changing. Like if you look at how quickly ChatGPT got to whatever it was, you look at different scales, whether it's 100 million users or $1 billion in revenue. They did it like in a fraction of the time of any other technology that's been adopted. And literally every single week, things are changing. So there is no big company training function that could possibly help you stay on top of this. Because by the time that they would publish their materials, it would literally already be 3 to 6 months old. So it's a very exciting time. And as soon as I learned about large language models and Gen AI, I was reading up on it continuously, daily, because you have to. Like if you want to be on top of what the trends are and you want to actually be relevant and you're operating a business in the space, like you literally have to be like drinking from the fire hose daily. If you're not building a software company in the category, perhaps it's not as important, but you get the point. So I'll pause for a second just because I feel like I'm starting to ramble again.
No, it's interesting in terms of just it really shifts the onus onto the individual to continue to learn and to grow. And I find for me, tinkering with some of the tools, reading, learning, studying the prompts, some of the use cases, how different people are using the tools, and it feels like a lot of it's through experimentation. Like these machines were built, and it's all about actually, okay, well, how do I actually use those things? And I feel like a lot of times it's being figured out by users. And that's purely from a layman's perspective as a non-data scientist, not a AI developer. But it feels like the shift to everything's digital. It feels like everything will have a Gen AI component to it, which makes me think the whole pace of learning is going to also continue on that same trajectory. And I don't know if organizations can keep up with that. It's about putting it back on us as individuals to actually constantly grow around, whether it's Gen AI or just the pace of change, the pace of development.
Yeah, this technology will be the most significant tool for wealth generation in the history of humankind. And I'll give you just like one example. You mentioned that everything will have a Gen AI component, and that'll be the first phase. So just from my industry in software, all of the software vendors that are like legacy, we could call them legacy software vendors. They built a business application. They're integrating generative AI into the user experience. All of those businesses will be disrupted because the next generation will be built entirely on Gen AI. You saw the same thing when the internet happened, where you'd have these like hybrid, like, oh, well, we have like an internet interface that shows you some of the capabilities. Or when mobile happened, it's like, oh, well, we have like a mobile interface, but it's not mobile native. The same is going to happen with Gen AI. Like I said, phase one is we integrated Gen AI. Phase two is those vendors either rebuild the application entirely on Gen AI, or they will be put out of business or massively disrupted by people who are building alternative applications. And those alternative applications will be done at a fraction of the cost. So you look at these engineering teams who build a business application for, sales automation. They have a massive army of engineers. You could literally produce an equivalent application using generative AI with a handful of software engineers, like 5 or 6. And we are literally seeing this right now. Like Midjourney, which does Gen AI for images, where you can generate an image, they're producing $200 million in revenue. Last time I looked, I don't know what it is now. And they have like a tiny team. I think it was like less than 20 people. But you're going to see the same thing in business applications where people are going to build, they're going to go across all of the SaaS business applications. They're going to say, hey, I will give you a Gen AI-based app that solves 80% of your functional and feature. In the next 6 months, I can build it for you, and it'll cost you 10% of what you're paying right now. It's entirely transformative. So what does that mean to an industry that couldn't hire enough software engineers, that these software engineers are making $200,000 out of college first year? And now all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a second, we don't need 1,000 software engineers. We need 20. It's going to be a really interesting time over the next 5 years.
Yeah, it's such a big change from a workforce transformation perspective. I mean, I rewind the tape, 2 years, right? I mean, that's the hottest skill. Everyone wants to be a software developer. Now it's just like, switch back. It feels like, the rise or the re-rise of the importance of the soft skills, but also about just agility in terms of how we grow and develop as individuals, because that's not the last change. It's just one of many changes. And it feels like those cycles are shortening. So it's like, how do we actually develop as individuals to grow and to get better and to make these adaptations?
Yeah, we're going to look back at the last 20 years of technology and look at it like it was the dark ages, because in order for you to build automation, you had to go to school or spend many, many years learning an arcane set of skills. And now with Gen AI, it's going to be so easy for people who are not programmers to build really sophisticated automation and business applications that will be totally disruptive to legacy businesses, which really are rent seekers. It's not natural that you would have 80, 90% gross margins on your product. Like, what other industry in the history of humankind had those kinds of gross margins? It was a window of time where technology could do that because of the capital and human resource constraints. Well, all of that's going to get disrupted. There's no longer a need for massive capital investment to get a business up and running, given these tools. And there's no longer a need for an army of people with really arcane knowledge.
Yeah, I'd love to go back to your comment earlier about time spent giving back to humanity through your job. I'm curious, like, what excites you most? Obviously, you talked about massive wealth generation, massive gains in productivity, a lot of disruption, layoffs, et cetera. Like, what excites you from a personal perspective? Just like, what taps into that desire to give back to humanity from the work you're doing now?
Well, I think trust has always been at the center of my personal why. I know that in order for people to have equitable, just, and peaceful societies, that's all built on a foundation of trust. So that's something that's been a recurring theme throughout my career and life. But more like practically, there's been times in my professional life where I've examined what I'm doing professionally. Like maybe I'm building, a software product for a multi-billion-dollar a year technology company that helps people use their products better or get more value from their products. That in and of itself is not inspiring to me. But what's always been inspiring to me is the people whose lives I can affect by helping them advance their careers, which helps them then provide better for their families, and hopefully helps them mentor and support other people. So like that's the thing that I know it's like a silly little thing. It's not like I'm not trying to, bring world peace in some grandiose way. I'm just simply trying to affect those around me that I work with or come into contact with kindness and support, and help them to have a better life. And generally that manifests through helping them advance in their career or help them to communicate more effectively with one another.
Yeah, no, I mean, so we can all make an impact, make a dent in the universe. I mean, I talked to, a colleague of mine. One of his reasons, or his principal reason for starting a company, was to basically to employ people in his local area. And so that I thought that was really inspiring. It's like, it didn't really matter what the product or service was or is for him. What inspires him, what gives him purpose, is helping people through employment.
Yeah, like putting a dent in the universe, as Jobs said, right? Steve Jobs. Like, how long until Steve Jobs is forgotten? And the work that he did really doesn't matter. Okay, so is it 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times longer than another titan of industry? Like, I don't know. I don't know who did U.S. Steel. I know he was a really big deal. Or was that Rockefeller? I don't even know, right? So if that was only like 40 or 50 years ago, and that was the Steve Jobs of the time, and I can't even remember who it is, does it really matter? Like a dent in the universe? Like, because it sounds like such a grandiose, like, people are going to remember me. No, nobody's going to remember you. The people who will remember you are the people that you help within your life. And when you're gone, you just fade away. I don't mean to be like nihilistic, but the only thing that really matters in life, in my opinion, is what we give to others. And it ultimately only matters in so much as you made the world a little bit better while you were here.
Aaron, I appreciate your time. Where can people go to find out more about Opaque, connect with you on social media, just ask you questions, learn more about what you're doing?
Well, they can hit me up on LinkedIn. It's isn't it interesting now? LinkedIn is like the go-to social network. It's not Twitter. Like, I don't even go to Twitter anymore. So LinkedIn has become quite a nice social network. It tends to be positive, maybe like a little bit overly hyperbolic, but I enjoy it. Hit me on LinkedIn. Opaque is opaque.co, not .com, but opaque.co. And really appreciate your time, Darren, as always.